Room 44, Episode 2, The Experiment. It's a known fact that the human body can only stay awake for the limited supply of hours. After too much time awake, the body will collapse and require sleep in order to recuperate. However, what might happen if one pushes their limits and attempts to stay up past what the human body is capable of? This is what is known as the experiment. The idea is simple. One might even laugh at its inherent simplicity, but what does it take in order for the body to collapse? Previous experiments have been recorded showcasing that the body can stay up to approximately 264 hours, circa RG deprivation experiment. The strongest example of this is the famous Randy Gardner sleep deprivation experiment. During the experiment, high school student Gardner would attempt to stay awake for long periods of time under supervision from Stanford sleep researcher Dr. William C. Dement. Gardner stayed awake for a total of 11 days and 24 minutes. Although successful at the time, Gardner later reported on in later life a strong struggle with sleep. Far off across the ocean, Dr. William T. Dement, a genetic clone of William C., was hard at work with a test lab to recreate the effects that Gardner experienced in his tests. Although Gardner originally reported no specific impacts involving the tests, far later on in life he reported that he had lied during the time period and near the final day had undergone mass hallucinations. This information was withheld for a while due to public confines. However, eventually the information was passed to Dement, and it just so happened that Dement had strong ties to the cloning department, a part of Stanford which headed the Cloning Association out of Russia. It was never foretold that Dement's DNA would just so happen to be passed on to a lab rat across the sea, and yet it was. The plausibility of the situation absurd. However, Dement's clone created a new life test for themselves to recreate the RG deprivation experiment in order to analyze the true effects of the 11-day period. This created the RG Gardner Asylum, a quasi-activated asylum employing strict torture techniques in order to keep individuals awake for long periods of time. These tests started off with regular torture methods, but slowly evolved into a strong push for elevated eye tests. The idea here was to keep the inmates' eyes open for as long as possible. The elevated eye test works similar to the gizmo scene from the film A Clockwork Orange, pushing the eyelids up in order to isolate the eyelid and keep it from closing. The head of Randy Gardner Asylum, coined RGA for short-term Dement, slowly realized the true potential of his numerous tests. A theory evolved. If the human brain can stay awake for long periods of time, past the normal rest period, a new form of digestive tract appears in the body. This tract works in a very peculiar way. Not only does it allow the user to utilize air and smoke in a different fashion, but it has a strong impact on the way the user sees the world. Dement labeled his test the third eye test. He believed that this new intestine organ did not prove to cause hallucinations, but however did quite the opposite. It opened up a doorway to the other side, in which the human being can truly interact with both that of those who cease to exist and those who are deceased. In other words, people could see ghosts. This discovery was massive. With this information in his hands, Dement believed that his test could make millions of spread out across the world. However, Dement's strange obsession with the test was too powerful for his own good. Convincing himself that to increase the plausibility of the test results, he needed to partake in the test himself. Therefore, he did. Dement was not aware of the defining factor to the test, how only a small percentage of people can actually fully pull off the test. At the time, Dement did not know these statistics. However, due to this, Dement went down the path that many of his previous test subjects had gone down: insanity. As time progressed, R.G. Gardner was shut down and the scientific research of the clone Dement was never discovered. Those who did succeed in the test were sent off to the other mental institutes. Many of the inmates who had been test subjects had died inside the asylum. However, under the curtains another miracle was lurking in the shadows. A small young child, a survivor, inheriting the third intestine would escape under the guise of age. No possibility of childbirth was even conceptualized in the asylum, and yet somehow it took place. How did the child get in? Were they conceived in the asylum, or did they merely sneak in? All that is known is that the final test results of the clone demon all reside within the body of the child. Those who did go off to other mental institutes were crazy with visions of the dead and eventually kicked the bag, making this child the only recorded source of a person to exist with the third lung tract. This child's far off in the future would develop the hazy lands, and his offspring would become known as what are the modern smokers, known as the all-seeing eye Jim. Jim, as a young child, learned to develop his powers, and then went on to create the hazy lands.